When God came to Abraham, all the way back in Genesis 17, he promised that Abraham's wife, Sarah, would have children, that these children would grow into nations, and that kings would come from her. Abraham's grandson, Jacob, who was later renamed as Israel, he was given the exact same promise from God. God said to him, "I am God Almighty, be fruitful and increase in number. A nation and a community of nations will come from you, and kings will be among your descendants." One last example. In Genesis 49, we read, "The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his." And so, as the generations pass, this promise from God is brought into greater specificity. This king will come specifically through Judah. That is a great blessing that a king would come, but there was also great danger in the appointing of kings, and perhaps you can guess why. Well, because of our sinful natural state, none of us do well with being elevated in the eyes of too many. Pride is a real danger to us at the best of times. So you imagine a man who has this much power, the power of a king to call the shots. And pretty soon you'll start to see the ways in which this might go wrong for Israel. And so God put these safeguards in place, a kind of blueprint for a godly king, given in Deuteronomy chapter 17. These are the rules that a king must obey. Even an earthly king is under the authority of the heavenly king, and he must recognize that too. So, a king must not acquire great numbers of horses for himself, or make the people return to Egypt to get more of them. For the Lord has told you, you are not to go back that way. He must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. He must not accumulate large amounts of silver or gold. When he takes the throne of his kingdom, he is to write for himself on a scroll a copy of this law taken from that of the Levitical priests. What a beautiful set of parameters given by God for the good of this king and for the nation that he serves. You imagine the diligence it requires to write out a copy of the law of God for yourself. The command to study the scriptures, even if you are the king. And 3 essential lines in the sand that must not be crossed. Do not accumulate horses, wives, or gold. All these things will lead your heart astray. Well, in chapter 10, Solomon violates 2 of those commands, and in chapter 11, he violates the 3rd. Your subheading in chapter 10, verse 14, probably says, Solomon's splendor. And we read about the extraordinary amount of gold that Solomon received each year. Now, before this point, the gold was being given to the great construction project of the temple. It had a good religious use. Now, though, the gold is simply going into the project of increasing Solomon's treasury and inflating Solomon's ego. There is no godly use for this much gold. We later find out that the people were being heavily burdened by the taxes that Solomon placed upon them. He's crushing the people so he can get their gold. What else? Verse 26, Solomon accumulated chariots and horses. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horses. He's violating rule number 2 there. And the reason this is such a great risk is that if you continually increase your horses and chariots, which of course is the ancient equivalent of military might, well, then you're going to be tempted to trust in your strength rather than in God's strength. In fact, Solomon's father, David, wrote a song about exactly that. Some trust in chariots, some trust in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. Well, as far as Solomon's faithfulness is concerned, this is the beginning of the end. Just listen to this description. King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. They were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, you must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods. Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. Now just picture what this looks like in reality. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. We then read, as Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods. And the rest of this chapter pictures a remarkably fast unraveling for a kingdom that once looked so righteous, steadfast, immovable, and secure. The Lord promises that he will tear the kingdom away from Solomon and give it to one of his subordinates. And the chapter ends with various adversaries raised up by God even to fight against King Solomon. His death is recorded at the end of this chapter. And sadly, we as readers breathe a bit of a sigh of relief that he was not allowed to go on living longer and causing more chaos and confusion. What a tragedy that is for the legacy of Solomon. He stands as a powerful example for those who think they are standing strong. They should take heed lest they fall. And those who have begun the race well, they should press on and run in such a way as to win the prize. May you have the spiritual fortitude to fight against your sin until the day God calls you home, so that when you go, those who are with you will not breathe a sigh of relief, but will appropriately mourn your loss and glorify your God and say to one another that you fought the good fight and you finished the race and you kept the faith to the end.